All right, hello. My name is Caesar, and I made this song in support of Von's Veganic gardening question time. And yeah, I hope you enjoy it. Peace.
You're about to hear some top class organic fucking allotment rap. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I be bored under the money trees, kind of a rapper, but really only give a off about the flowers growing next to me. Letters to celery, lessons in letters, we're letting the veg grow. Sunstorms, hail blow, but still I'm here, digging up potatoes in my big old brown coat. It's lockdown, so all these harvests come in handy, and it's healthy to be grafting on some ground that's really asking for tomatoes. I might smoke a Marlboro while sprouting avocado. It really takes its time so slow. Yo, it really takes its time so slow. Practice my patience while spacing apart the plants in the plot. I'm raking all these leaves which biodegrade into good soil. Hey yo, soil where I choose to toil. I don't support the wars for stolen oil, temper boils. I don't support having poison covering food and royals richer than everyone else, or CEOs who never loyal to no one but the dough. Yeah, to no one but the dough. So I'm sticking to my homegrown, from sticky icky to chili, zucchini and spinach. I never won't, no.
You hear me? It's all about this allotment business, you get me? What, like £60 for a whole year, man? And like, I bring home these fat stacks of you know, kale and perpetual spinach and all that. Do you know what I mean? What do you know about organic food? You don't know nothing about that, man. And yo, honestly, bro, just try it, fam. Allotments, you know what I mean?
Support allotments, bro. The Allotment Act, in whatever year it was a very important act in the UK history. Right up there with the Ramblers Act, all right?
Well, we are back with Veganic Gardeners Question Time. I'm your host, Giles Bryant, and we have an amazing panel of experts and some fascinating questions coming up for you today as we move back into the autumn and the harvest time. And it's my great pleasure to introduce some members of the panel. So who do we have coming up first? Who could it be in the panel? Oh, here he is. It's Jonathan Barker, the vegan forest gardener. So, John, just tell the people out there a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Hello. Well, I've been vegan for 22 years and feeling fit and healthy. And basically, over the past 12 years, we've been creating a forest garden for abundant food, for abundant health, and for nature and wildlife to revive at the same time as us getting all this produce, fuel, medicines, materials, and the psychological benefits of forest gardens as well. It's the future.
Wonderful passion by Jonathan. And who else do we have on our special panel today? Who will it be? Who will it appear out of the ether? It's Piers. Piers,
hello.
How are you, my friend?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Lovely to see you again through the Veganic Gardeners Question Time. So, Piers, for those that don't know you, a little introduction, please.
Well, yes, I'm an author and a writer, and I actually, since I last was on this show, I've relocated from Norfolk to Sussex near Brighton. So I've been busily creating a new garden, because the new house, it was just a big square of lawn. So I've been building raised veg beds, putting up a greenhouse. So it's disrupted my growing season this year, but I'm getting everything ready for next year. So I'm good to go now.
Beautiful. Sounds like a great project. And our final panelist, where may she be from? Here she is. It's Meg. How are you, Meg?
Good. How are you today, Giles?
Oh, it's wonderful to see you again.
Good to see you too.
I think beautiful, wonderful person. For those that don't know you, Meg, a little introduction from you, please. I think we might even have some slides, a multimedia.
Yeah, in a moment. So my name's Meg, and I'm up in Chile, Canada, where I'm an avid gardener. And back in 2008, I co-founded the Veganic Agriculture Network to promote plant-based farming and gardening in North America. And more recently, I launched the Learn Veganic gardening course, where we teach people how they can grow their own veganic gardens at home, whether that's in a balcony, backyard, or in an allotment.
Wonderful. I mean, such vital work that you are all doing. So what about these slides then? I'm excited.
Yeah, so we recently just put out a new free guide to 20 veganic materials to improve fertility in your plant-based garden. And if you'd like a copy, you can go to learnveganic.com/materials to request a copy of it. And basically, we've just looked at what are some of the materials that people can work with. We've created a little poster showing 20 different materials, and each of those materials we go into a little bit more detail about how to use them, what some of the advantages are or disadvantages of using that particular material. And really, for me, this is the guide I would have liked to have when I was first learning how to garden veganically, because sometimes we hear about just 2 or 3 techniques, and it might take us a while to learn about that wider diversity. And one thing that we've particularly emphasized in this guide is some of the materials that are best at building soil, some of the materials that are particularly high in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, because it can be tough sometimes to track down where are the sources of those in the plant-based world, and also which materials are best at providing a really balanced diet for your plants, because there's some things like hay that provide a balanced diet on their own. And in the guide, we've really focused on materials that are eco-friendly, that people can grow their own fertilizers at home, things that you can get locally, things that you can get for free. So it's really about how to create your own veganic fertilizers, and just to introduce people to that wide diversity that's available to them.
Wow. I am, after the show, I will be logging on.
Awesome.
Well done. That is absolutely amazing. I really will. And I think the Vegan Organic Network are doing amazing work connecting so many people together and organizations together. So I'm excited because we have been sent via email some wonderful questions, panelists, and it might test your veganic knowledge. I hope it does get the old brain going. And for you listening at home as well, do write in the comments any answers you might have to some of these questions, and indeed any more questions you'd like the panel to tackle in the coming months. So let's start off, please. The first question, Maestro. It's from Stella in Norwich, friend of the show, Stella. Hello, panel. I've just inherited a garden with a lovely medlar tree. It seems to have a lot of fruit developing, but I'm not sure when to harvest or what to do with them. Can the panel help, please? The medlar, a strange fruit indeed. So anyone like to open up on this one? Piers.
Medlars really are nice, lovely trees, and they have gorgeous autumn color. But the key thing is the picking of the fruit and preparing it is vital. They're usually harvested quite late in the year, so sort of early November time. Doesn't matter if there's been a frost already. In fact, in some ways that's beneficial. And when you pick the fruit, initially it's quite hard, and you don't want to use it straight away because it's quite unpalatable. So the thing to do is to spread the fruits out on some seed trays or something like that, and leave them somewhere cool and dry for maybe even a number of weeks. And over that period, they will soften, and the flesh inside the fruits starts to turn brown. And this process is called bletting. It's almost letting the fruit start to rot. But that's a key thing. If you try and process them too soon, it just won't work, and you'll end up with something that doesn't taste great. So go through this bletting process, and then simply cut the fruit up if you're making a jelly or something like that. which is one of the most well-known ways of making produce from medlars, jellies or fruit cheeses, fruit butters, things like that. So to make a jelly, you cut the fruit up, simmer it in water until it's all a soft brown mush, and then you strain it through a jelly bag, which is something like this, which of course you can make your own or you can buy them. And that needs to go on a stand, which again you can make, or you can buy a kit one like this. So this will sit in a bowl, sit over a bowl with the bag at the top. You pour the medlar mush into here, and then you leave it overnight to drip through into the bowl below. And a really important thing is that don't be tempted to squeeze the bag to get more juice out, because then it won't be clear. So next day, put this juice in a pan with your sugar, lemon juice, boil it up like you would for any jam or jelly until it reaches setting point, then jar it up. And that's certainly my favourite thing to do with medlars.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, John, do you have anything to add to the medlar there for our friend in Norwich?
I love to let them sometimes just ripen naturally on the tree. Usually happens around mid-November, late November, sometimes even into early December. So it's a great late fruit that you can actually eat raw. So I love just peeling them and just eat the very soft, squidgy flesh. But yeah, they're great as a late fruit to add to your diet, just to eat raw.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that we can move on now to the next question, please. Okay, Shelley from Hove, lovely Hove. My garden veg plot has produced loads more pumpkins than usual this year. Should I wait till Halloween to harvest them? And what can I do with them other than pumpkin soup? Oh, one of my favourite. To the team, to the panel, have any preferred recipes? Who'd like to open up with this one, panel? About pumpkins. Okay, John, you go first then. We'll come to you after in a minute, Meg.
Okay, I mean, pumpkins can be added in so many different recipes. I love curry, like Giles, and I love bulking out a curry with pumpkins in late October, November time. Just fantastic, easy to chop up and freeze. If you've got big old pumpkins like the Atlantic giants, you get a lot of flesh out of them for your buck. Also, chutney. You know, obviously a great thing to bulk out your chutney. So wonderful for that. And pumpkin pie. You know, it's a very traditional, famous American recipe, which is very nice. Quite a sweet recipe, quite a flavoursome dish. There's so many things you can do with pumpkins. They're just wonderful, and they get you through. It's a food that gets you through the winter, because some pumpkins, like the jack-o'-lantern and ones like that, you know, they'll store for quite a long while. So it helps get you through the winter, really. Brilliant food.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. So over to you, Meg. When should she harvest them? Is there any guide, any advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would just harvest them before there's really hard frosts, because if there's very hard frosts, it could end up by damaging the flesh. So, I mean, it depends in terms of the time of the year. It's going to depend where you're living. We need to harvest them here in September. I imagine in England you can wait a few more weeks. But we do like them to, you know, go through a little bit of a cold period, just not those heavy frosts. But I actually just had a pumpkin that survived on just at, you know, room temperature indoors, and it was still going strong even until a couple of weeks ago. So I had that question a couple of weeks ago: what do I do with a giant pumpkin that had been sitting around for months, and I hadn't got dug into it yet? And a few of the recipes that I really appreciated was just roasting the pumpkin. And then once the pumpkin flesh is roasted, there's so many things we can do with it. Like Jonathan mentioned, curries. I made a lovely chickpea and peanut kind of curry stew with pumpkin in the background. Pumpkin smoothies can actually be really good. So it's kind of like pumpkin pie, but in smoothie form. I made a pumpkin cake last week that was absolutely delicious. It was kind of like a carrot cake, and the pumpkin really added a lot of moisture to it. And one thing just to keep in mind is eating the pumpkin seeds. I mean, that was actually in North America, squash made up a large portion of the traditional diet here, and it was largely because the seeds provide so much protein and so much fat that can help get us through the winter months too.
Absolutely. That's such a good tip there. Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, shall we move on? Here we go. Maestro, please. What is our next question? Here it is. It's coming up. The anticipation is building. Is there anyone out there giving us a question? If not, I can give you a question, panel. How about that? Whom would you recommend as vegan organic seed suppliers? That was from Chris.
Sure, yeah, I can answer that one because we actually have a page about that on the Go Veganic website. I think we've got some different questions popping up on the screen.
We'll come back to that one, Maestro. We'll come back to that one. I think he'd fallen asleep or something. Okay, can we take that slide down for a minute? I really want this answer. I want to know about the seeds.
Okay.
Where can I buy them?
On the Vegan Organic Network website, which is goveganic.net, we have a page where we talk about veganic seed suppliers. So the best way to find it is go to goveganic.net, go up in the search bar, type the word seeds, and it'll take you to a page about sourcing seeds and saving seeds. The good news is there are a few veganic seed suppliers now, because 10 years ago I only knew of one in the entire world. Now I know of about 8, so that's already an improvement. But I can say that most of the time people are still going to need to buy seeds from just organic seed suppliers, because veganic seed suppliers are just few and far between. It's something that we hope that many more will become available in future years. So that the longest running veganic seed producers in the US, and that's Will Bonsall, who wrote the book Will Bonsall's Essential Guide to Radical Self-Reliant Gardening. And he actually runs a seed bank. So he saves thousands of different types of seeds. In terms of ones that are commercially for sale, I think he has like 3 types for sale, and then thousands that he stores in a seed bank for future generations. There's also a new place in the US that started selling seeds within the last couple of years called Asamina Acres, that's located in North Carolina. So people around the US can buy that online. That's just a veganic farm that decided to add seed production as one extra thing they do. Where I am in Canada, we're actually lucky. We've got 3 seed producers, 3 veganic seed producers up here. One of them is Jimmy Videlli, who's been on the show before, who's located in Quebec. And his farm, La Ferme de l'Aube, sells lots of different types of heirloom tomato seeds and a variety of other seeds. There's Pie Bird Farm Sanctuary. So they actually have an animal sanctuary, but they also have a fully veganic garden. And in that veganic garden, they produce seeds that help support their sanctuary. And then there's a new place out in British Columbia, Western Canada, called Western Garden Seeds, and that's at seedsaving.ca. And that's also just a new veganic farm that's starting that decided to add veganic seeds as one of their offerings. The only place I know of in the UK is a place called Beans and Herbs. So that's the name of the seed producer, Beans and Herbs, if you look them up online. But they actually create their own seeds that are vegan organically grown that they sell, but they also bring in seeds from a bunch of other seed producers that are not veganically grown. But if you write to them, they'll send you the list of the ones that are specifically, vegan organic seeds, if you're looking for that in particular. And then Peter Albrecht, who's been on the show before, who's out in Sweden. He's a veganic seed producer who I think he only delivers perhaps within Sweden. And there's one person in Australia, Permaculture Al, who basically is a veganic gardener who decided to start producing veganic seeds. So most of these are very, very small veganic seed producers. But I think it can actually be a source of inspiration, that a lot of veganic farms or even veganic gardeners can become small-scale seed producers and start to offer that. And, even here in Canada and the US, for example, and probably in England, there's seed saver networks of people who save seeds at home and who trade them with other people. And I think that something similar could be developed in the veganic world. That's a network like that isn't in place yet, but I think it could be created. And I mean, we have tons of veganic seeds at our place, and it's just because we save our own seeds from year to year. And seed saving can seem a bit intimidating if you look at all the rules that commercial seed savers are supposed to follow, that you're supposed to make sure that this plant doesn't cross-pollinate with that plant, and you need this distance, and so on and so forth. But if you're just saving your own seeds for your own garden, you can just wing it. And honestly, most of the time, things aren't going to cross-pollinate. If they do, it can be an exciting discovery to see what things look like when they cross-pollinate. So, I mean, we have, more than half of our seeds that we use are veganic, and it's just because we've saved our seeds year after year. We initially bought organic ones, and now they're veganic because we're saving our own.
Wonderful. Well, that is, thank you, Meg. Brilliant answer there. Okay, let us move on, panel, because I think the maestro was very excited to get this one up. A small little essay, I think, by our next question. Here we go. Not sure who it's from, but dear Vegan Organic Network, we have had an allotment for around a year, and as a vegan, would prefer not to use manure. Yes, indeed. The use of manure is standard practice amongst the other allotmenteers, and it's delivered for a very low price. Well, it certainly is. As I still work full-time, my wife does most of the work on the allotment, so we need a veganic way of enriching the soil, which is not too labour intensive. We've started using green manure, well done. We're composting, well done, but we will never, I think, become self-sufficient in our own compost. I don't know. So for the time being, come spring next year, we'll be buying in green compost to enrich the soil. Well, I think the slide there, oh my God, it goes on. This is actually quite expensive and not that easy to get hold of. After a lot of research, we found a supply will deliver for around £100. Do you have any other suggestions for how we could enrich the soil, which is practical for our situation? Thank you, Martin Tucker. Thank you, Martin. Okay, well, obviously, Meg, you got your wonderful guide there. Anything else we'd like to add, Piers or John, on this one? How are we going to enrich the soil veganically? Piers. Okay.
Yeah, well, I can just, I mean, obviously Meg's gone through loads of good options already, but, the person who posed this question said he's already started using green manures. And that really is a very valuable way to go. And if you follow, for example, Ian Tolhurst's farm in Oxfordshire, he's got this 1920 acre veganic farm, which he farms commercially and sells the produce. And he tries to make it as closed loop as possible by not importing anything. And he uses an awful lot of green manures and puts part of his land aside for whole seasons, maybe even 2 seasons in a row, just to grow green manures and improve the fertility of the soil. And since I found out more about what he does and the way he does it, I've started using green manures a lot more myself. So I definitely recommend looking at both his website, which is brilliant, and also he's one of the authors of the book Growing Green, which includes a lot of information about using green manures.
Yes, thank you. So, John, would you like to add anything to that? I know you had your hand up there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I'll just wait till I come on the screen.
Okay. I think someone's going to press a button. The wonders of technology. Here we are, all around the world. We could do a ventriloquist. We could try that.
Okay, I'll start acting. So, I mean, one of the best ways to improve the soil for a very cheap way is if you're fortunate enough to have a chipping machine or know somebody who's got one, when you cut your hedging, your hawthorn or whatever hedging you've got, preferably deciduous unless you want a more acidic ericaceous soil. Chip up your hedging cuttings and just mulch with that. I mean, that's fantastic for improving soil fertility. Obviously, leaf mulch, amazing. You can either put it in a big compost heap first of all and let it rot down a bit over the year or so and then add it, or you can just add it early on, if depending, because it will lock the moisture into the soil as well for the following year, and you just plant within it and it will suppress weeds. Throwing seaweed onto the soil. I mean, you have to have permission if you're going to gather seaweed en masse. But there's so many ways to enrich the soil for a very little money. So, think of those techniques as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Meg, you just got some of your top ones, I think, because you've done what's your view on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the person mentioned that they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily have enough compost. I mean, as long as they have enough space to do the composting, there can just be that question of whether you can get more material, because there's so much that's going to the waste stream right now. There are so many organic materials that are just being sent to the dump. One thing that I used to do was, I would just pick up all of the fruits and veggies that were going to be thrown out by a health food store once a week. So I would go and do my grocery shopping, and I would pick up everything that they were throwing out at the same time, and I would compost all of that. And there can sometimes just be food production factories that are in your area where you might be able to get some waste from tofu production or something like that, and just mix it with some leaves and just have a big compost pile going. So that's one thing to think about if they have enough space to compost. I know one thing that can be a challenge with allotments is, if it's not our own yard, we can't necessarily take advantage of the space as much as we'd like to. One thing that I try to do is to use my pathways in my community garden as much as possible. So in my allotment, if I've got certain paths where I would just be walking between my garden rows, I'll pile a lot of leaves there. I might even pile them a foot thick. And then I'm basically creating leaf mold in my pathways that I can eventually put up on my beds. The same thing can go with chipped branch wood or even larger wood chips, and that might cause nitrogen lockup if you put them on your beds. You can put them in your pathways. You can put them quite thick. As that decomposes, eventually you can put it up on your beds. And one thing to keep in mind too is, there are some basically products that you can buy that, I definitely in favor of doing as much as we can on the allotment. But, sometimes this person was looking at some green waste compost. I think if you found green waste compost in your area that's veganic, then that's fantastic, because that can be hard to track down. But in the UK, there's things like Plant Grow and Natural Grower that both produce fertilizers that are suitable for vegans. So that's something that you could look into if you're just looking for maybe a quick fix. Sometimes at the beginning of the season, you might just want a little extra boost that you can give to your plants. In the US, there's Good Dirt. In Canada, there's Vegano 333. So those are just little things that people can purchase if they just need to give their garden a little kick at the beginning of the season.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, all members of the panel there. And that's a very important one. So thank you for that question. Okay, we're going to go for the next question, please. What have we got? What has the maestro got for us? What do they want to know out there in veganic world? Well, you can cut the suspension with a knife, with a vegan knife. Well, here we go. This is from Alice. Alice, she's just contacted. Oh, here we go. Hold on, here we go. How can farming create carbon sinks and revive nature? Okay, so carbon sinks. Well, don't get me started on carbon. Oh, anyway, enough of me. Jonathan, over to you to start, please.
Well, forest gardening is such an amazing technique to produce abundant food and, soak in those pollutants that us humans create. It's just so sensible, and at the same time reverse biodiversity loss. it's just one of the obvious techniques. And as the trees grow, I mean, what is it I've read? Every 10 trees takes in, what is it, a kilo? When they're mature, become more mature, it takes in a ton of carbon or something every year. Anyway, it's just amazing, And if the average person produces, 4 or 5 tons a year, then 40 trees, 50, it's just obvious. Just do the math. It soaks it all up and soaks those pollutants up and gives you food as well at the same time if it's an agroforestry forest garden based system.
Okay, so good answer. So any of the other panelists like to chip in here? Okay, Piers, over to you.
Well, just to say that obviously this is a huge question and a really important one. And a book I really recommend is called Regenesis by George Monbiot, which tackles a lot of issues, including this. In fact, I wrote down that the subtitle for the book is Feeding the World Without Devouring the Planet. And before he wrote this book, George read literally thousands of scientific reports on all matters surrounding this, so that he had all the information he needed to write this book. And it includes a lot of things that other people have questioned. So, for example, if you're talking about veganic growing, quite often there'll be somebody who'll throw something in like, yes, but don't forget that grass-fed beef is actually better for the environment than just growing crops. And sometimes you don't have all the information to hand in your brain to give a good answer to this when it's just thrown at you. But George has investigated all of this in detail and has come up with scientifically proven answers to all these questions. And sure enough, he does conclude that we need to drastically reduce livestock farming. Ideally, get rid of it altogether, of course. But yeah, it's a brilliant book.
Thank you. And Meg, over to you. Any comments on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Jonathan that if you can do forest gardening, that's absolutely the way to go. But I'd also like to say that, even if somebody has just a balcony or a tiny backyard, there are so many ways that we can take some of the ideas that we find in something like forest gardening and put them into scale, or into practice on a very small scale. I've got an allotment where, we have a haskap bush that's kind of central in just this small allotment, and it attracts so many native pollinators. It's also creating a lot of biomass, and even someone who has a balcony can concentrate on just adding some flowers that are going to be attracting native pollinators, and just keeping that biomass in the system, just cycling it back, even if it's through composting, just to recognize that anytime that we're putting flowers out there, anytime that we're getting plants to grow, they're taking in carbon from the air and they're stocking it, and just to make sure that we're just revaluing those resources as much as we can.
Beautiful, wonderful answers. Thank you for that question. Okay, well, it's exciting, isn't it? Are we going to get another question? And if so, what is it going to be? Here we go. Joyce Peterson. I live in Chile on a small organic holding. My question is, can you add sourdough starter and other scobies from kombucha and apple cider vinegar to compost? What a wonderful question. A slightly bizarre question, but welcome our friend from Chile. My God, I've forgotten what the question was anyway. Can we add is it a Scooby or Scoby, first of all?
Scoby.
Can we add the Scoby to the compost? Or as we could say, compost. Or we could say compost or tomato. Yeah, okay, over to you. I mean, I'm just going to say yes. But anyway,
yeah. Yeah, basically, I mean, pretty much anything that comes out of your kitchen, you can add to your compost bin. I mean, perhaps the exception is stuff that's very oily, can sometimes cause some issues. But, when it comes to things like sourdough starter, The only thing that I would say is if I ever had a big thing of sourdough starter and it was just really gloopy, I'd probably make sure that I spread it out in my compost a bit amongst something that's kind of drier material like dried leaves, just because, a big blob of wet dough might have problems with becoming anaerobic or just being kind of gross when you go to turn your compost. But otherwise, there's no problem with putting it in. I would just make sure I spread it out a bit to get proper aeration.
Any other comments there, Piers? Over to you.
Yeah, Meg's right. Of course, you can add it to your compost heap. But when I was making sourdough bread, you have your starter, which is your pet that you lovingly feed, and you're putting all this flour in to feed it. And you have to take some of the starter out and do something else with it. And although you can put it on your compost heap, it always felt like a bit of a waste to me to put part of my pets that I've been lovingly feeding onto a compost heap. So I did look at other things you can do with it. And one of the most successful I found was to make crackers from it. So all you do is you get the starter and you can spread it on a sheet of greaseproof paper or something like that on a baking tray, stick it in the oven until it becomes dried out and brittle, and then you can just break it up and use it like crackers.
Brilliant, wonderful. I want to throw a question in. I was in Australia years ago, and we went to a permaculture garden. It wasn't a veganic garden; it was just a permaculture garden. And she had the compost heap. I'm very interested in compost. I'm really into it. Do you know what I mean? I'm really into it. Anyway, they had this dog had been hit, tragically on the road, and he goes, well, we chucked it on there, mate, I don't know how you guys feel, because there was a pigeon that was dead in the garden. I saw it at the bottom of our yew tree. This, and I kind of thought, shall I put it on the compost heap? Shall I not? How do you guys feel about that? Anyone want to,
Yeah, I'd worry about putting carcasses on a compost heap, partly because you never know what sort of pathogens or diseases might then get incorporated into that, which will end up in food that you eat. So, and I did think about that recently, actually, when my neighbour's cat ambushed a pigeon on my lawn. And I actually ran out and managed to frighten the cat away, and the pigeon flew off. So that was a happy ending. But it did leave my lawn completely covered with feathers. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just put them on the compost heap. But then I thought twice about that, because I thought, we've got bird flu in the UK, well, lots of other countries too at the moment. So perhaps that wasn't a wise thing to do. So I would be wary about putting animals or parts of them onto the compost heap.
I mean, I actually kicked the pigeon under the yew tree.
Right.
That was what I did. I mean, with love.
Then, yeah.
It was dead, yeah. Anyway, let's move on to the proper questions. I wanted to throw that in there. Thanks for that, Piers. Okay, Maestro, in the background, what have we got? Oh, here we go. Here is Thor. It's Thor, the god of thunder. How do you secure sufficient nutrient input as a vegan organic food production system based on a mix of annuals and perennials? So far, I found it difficult. See, I can add enough nutrients to the cycle of annuals without overworking myself and without the use of animal manure. My toilet and food compost is just not sufficient. Well, again, quite a kind of similar sort of theme. His toilet's not sufficient. Meg, hit us with it, please.
I mean, I think one of the most important things to start with is just keeping the nutrients that are already in our garden, because a small portion will be removed from our garden when we eat the food, but a lot of nutrients that are being lost through erosion or just being washed away. So as Piers already mentioned, Ian Tollers has a great system that involves green manure. So those green manures are not only going to help bring extra nutrients in some cases, like with nitrogen fixing, legume plants, for example, but they're also going to help hold in a lot of the nutrients that you already have. If we look at England, for example, where you have this very long rainy winter, that can be months and months where you could be losing your nutrients with the rain. Whereas if you can find ways just to hold those nutrients in, that's really the first place to start. If we look at buckwheat, for example, used as a green manure, that's one that can really help draw some of the phosphorus out of your bedrock, because a lot of the time you actually already have enough phosphorus and you have enough potassium. It's just a question of, do you have a soil food web that's vibrant enough to slowly break that bedrock down and to make that potassium and phosphorus accessible to the plants? So oftentimes there's not a lack of nutrients. There's just a question of, can you make those available? So just supporting the soil food web by not tilling, not digging, or minimizing digging, and that will get, that will help support the mycorrhizal fungi populations, and those mycorrhizal fungi are much better than plants at going in and getting the phosphorus that's already there in your bedrock. So the more you can work the way that a natural system would, the way that a forest would, in terms of accessing slowly the nutrients that are already there, then we don't necessarily need to rely on inputs nearly as much. And we can see that from Ian Tolhurst's farm. I mean, he's working in a way that really minimizes inputs. And the person mentioned about having perennials and annuals. Oftentimes we can think of the perennials as a source of feeding our annual plants, because the perennials are going to take care of themselves much better. They've got these very, very deep root systems where they're going to be able to access nutrients that annual plants would never be able to access. And they're going to bring a lot of those nutrients up in their small tree branches and in their leaves. So if we can use those leaves and those small tree branches in order to feed our annual garden, that's a great way to go. And as I mentioned before, in terms of inputs, I mean, there is so much that's going to the landfill. If we look at the food waste in this country, whether that's happening at factories that are producing foods, or at grocery stores, or at the home level, there's just so much that's going to the landfill. It's causing methane production when it gets buried in the landfill. It's causing a lot of basically toxic waste to come out of landfills, because it mixes in with everything else in the landfill and it gets wet and it seeps out. And so there's so much pollution that's caused by that. And so we can think of inputs much more in terms of just cycling the nutrients that are already in our community. And another thing I like to think about is, how can we use the area around the garden to feed the garden? Can your front yard be a source of fertilizer for your backyard? For example, in your front yard, can you grow things like nettles? Can you grow things like comfrey? Can you grow some sort of ornamental clover? Can you have a lawn, that's a mix of grass and clover? And if you can use your, everything in your front lawn or the side of your house as ways of growing organic matter, in an aesthetic way to keep your neighbors happy. But if you can use your, unused parts of your property as a way of feeding your garden, you can really, try to create a closed loop system where you don't have to buy anything in.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Guys, I just want to move on to the final question, if that's okay. So we'll let Jonathan and Piers have an answer to this one. I have a couple of raised beds. They're 63 feet. Here we go. And I harvested all the produce. Yep. What should I do with them now? Can I plant things, or should I wait till spring? I've got some 2-year-old compost. Okay, Gary, you need a bit of help. What can we do? Piers.
First of all, I would take that 2-year-old compost and spread it out on the top of the beds, so that over the winter it can start to be pulled down into the compost, the soil below. But there are things that you can sow at this time of year, things like broad beans, garlic in sort of maybe November time. That's getting ready for next year, of course. You can even sow some really fast growing things right now, things like pak choi, winter lettuces, especially if you've started them off in a greenhouse, or you get them as plug plants. The other thing, of course, is on any of the beds that you're not growing these things in, is to grow green manures. And although it's nearly October, you can still sow a green manure, such as scarlet clover, which is my favourite. I grow that a lot. So that ideally over winter, as well as the compost feeding the soil beneath, you've got the green manures on top. So don't leave any of the beds bare. If there's anywhere you're not growing crops, just put loads of green manure seeds all over.
Wonderful. And Jonathan, do you have anything to add to help our friend down in Southend there with his empty beds?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to get as much produce as you can out of your beds, but it's also good to rest them, just let the compost work its way into that soil for the next spring. Crop rotation obviously is very good. So maybe leave one bed 1 year just to rest in the winter, and for the mulch to work its way into the soil. And the other one, you could put your overwintering onions or garlic or winter salads and so on into that one. So yeah, think about also allowing the soil to rest, like in nature. Things aren't constantly productive all the time for food, of course.
Wonderful advice. And I think that takes us up to the end of the show. I'd like to give my thanks to the here we go. Well, before we do, it's the Squash and Pumpkin Festival at Hardwick, Sunday the 2nd of October. That's this Sunday, 12 till 4. How about that? That looks jolly wonderful. Farmers market, craft activities, and all lots of goodies there. Learn more about the Veganic Way, the Pumpkin Festival. I'd like to give my thanks to Meg, Piers, and Jonathan for their wonderful advice, for joining us, and also to the maestro behind the scenes. Where would we be without him? Dan Graham, holding it all together for us at Veganic Garden Question Time. Well, thank you out there. Do keep checking in with the work of Von and our friends all around the world, doing amazing work, and keep it veganic. Thank you all so much. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.